right, guys. So let's go to Wilshire Avenue, or Wilshire Boulevard rather. Wilshire Boulevard is in Los Angeles, and this is where I decided to locate the project. It's a 7-story passive house, multifamily house. And I chose Los Angeles because it's an amazing city, but it needs a lot more housing and a lot larger housing. So there's an experiment on what a Los Angeles future building will look like. And so this one is right near Koreatown, near the metro station. I don't know if you're that familiar with Los Angeles, but it's a pretty interesting area, mostly parking around Wilshire. And also a fun fact about Wilshire, it's the original, what do they call it? It's the original, I'm trying to remember the name of it. Basically, strip mall, essentially. It was the invention of the modern strip mall. So we have that to thank for Los Angeles, if nothing else. And I was also really inspired by a trip to Kyoto, Japan, and how they dealt with housing in dense environments, especially with contemporary buildings and new buildings. And the idea of the shop house going back a couple of centuries, especially in Asian countries, where often people would live in the upper stories or in the back of the building and make a living at the big front of the building. So you had this interaction with the sidewalk and community all through cities. So how did we revisit that? Well, the idea was the micro business. And I have a small coffee truck that I developed a few years ago. And the idea was how do you create micro businesses on the ground? And Los Angeles is quite famous for its mobile food scene. So the idea is to create a food park off of Wilshire Avenue where people can constantly come in, park daily rotation of different food trucks. There's a commissary kitchen on the ground floor and a bar, and just a place for people to congregate and get out of the sun and enjoy an afternoon lunch or even a dinner. And the upper parts are just living spaces for different types of different groups of people, from individuals to families. The biggest concern was that the site faces west in Los Angeles. So how does a passive house work when almost all your actual windows are going to be facing west? So we got very aggressive on the shading in that sense. The program is, the first floor is, as I mentioned, is some public utilities, restrooms, commissary kitchen, things like that. Second floor, classrooms and community room for the people who live there. And then various different types of scales of apartment buildings for families, individuals, couples, things like that. But one of the things we've been playing with was developing a, you can imagine a community space where there's a shared kitchen, so we can make the apartments a little bit smaller, a little less wasteful in redundant space, but also using the staircase and patios as community space as well. For fire escape is actually expanded out for more community use. The fabric of the building, and this is where a lot of people, most of the attention has been from folks, is this is going to be a wood timber podium, basically 3 stories, using CLTs and NLTs, cross-laminated and nail-laminated timbers, using wooden nails by a company called Lignolock. And then Echo Cocoon straw panels are the top 4 stories. Straw panels that are developed out in Europe, and they're getting quite well known, especially in Northern Europe. And they are a certified passive house component. And I'll get a little bit more into details on them. So the Echo Cocoon, usually the first question people have for these straw panels, they're not straw bale, they're straw packed, tightly packed panels. And the first people will say is they burn, but they actually don't burn. They're very high density, and which leaves no real room for oxygen for burning. And because it has a high content silica, the straw, it's actually not that flammable in the first place. And we cover with fire resistant materials, actually incredibly fire resilient structural system and insulation system. The nails are wooden, developed a few years ago by Beck. Lignolock is the name of the brand. And they're developing cross-laminated and nail-laminated panels that you can make with automated systems without glues and things like that. So they've been busy developing a robotic tables with pneumatic nail heads to create these large panels. So you don't need a large glue press to build them with. So smaller shops can build them. So it all comes down to the carbon question when it comes to the building itself. And in this case, the operational energy for the building and help with Passive House Institute is that we're running at 130 kilowatt hours per square meter in the negative. So we're producing much more power than we need, about 3 times through the Passive House Premium design process. And the materials embodied carbon, this is what the last thing I was able to get done before the show started, using the pH ribbon carbon calculator, is at 224 kilograms per square foot, per square meter. And it's hard to know what that really means because these numbers are pretty new, but this is a pretty low number. So I'll get into the details on what that actually means and some of the caveats involved. Quickly, the solar panels. The solar panels it's a huge array on the building. One's a horizontal, one's a vertical. And I'm showing the graph for the PV output because in the winter, when we need most of our demand and the lower production, typically for solar panels, the horizontal panels, the vertical panels work almost as well as the horizontal panels in that configuration. So, it's about time of use and time of making power throughout annual basis and also on the monthly basis. So it's good to keep that in mind when we're designing these not net zero energy buildings, but these real-time energy buildings. Passive House verification. So we're able to almost completely eliminate space heating, have a very tiny heating load, and most of it's space cooling. So we're about 2/3 of the cooling demand threshold for Passive House, which is great. So we did get cooling under control in Los Angeles. And with the PV and doing some things like the triple pane windows really actually made a big difference, as well as doing heat recovery for the hot water, things like that, really just edged us right over to the premium part of the chart, which took quite a bit of work, but it was fun to see that actually doable, at least theoretically. Part of the systems that we're using, I mentioned the triple pane windows that made a big difference. The double panes actually gave us more of a heating load, which would have complicated the entire system. So it may save us money in the long run to put triple panes in rather than double panes, as well as the comfort and energy savings. We can combine the cooling with the ventilation system, like using the Ventacity system, HRV on each floor, coupled with a heat pump, VRFM or type of system. It looks like we can get trickle cooling to each floor or to each room based on each floor. And we're using basically the space behind the elevator shaft for the equipment, so it can get nice and compact and right in the center of the building for easy distribution. On the carbon side, I was using, as I mentioned, the pH ribbon, which is just being released. It's in beta now in the United States. It's out in Europe on the metric, and I was using the metric version of it. But they'll be rolling out the Americanized version of it pretty soon. Hopefully, we'll see in September, maybe not. And what I was learning with the ribbon, it's a PHPP plugin, and I can take all my takeoffs from the building and then assign what the materials are. And a lot of those materials are actually in the library itself, so it's pretty easy to match it with the wall assemblies, floor assemblies, roof assemblies. And what you can see is that PV is actually the largest single carbon embodied material or category within it. And part of the reason is because the PV needs to be replaced every 25 to 30 years, is the assumption. So each time that gets replaced, we make a big tick up in the carbon. Same you could say for batteries or other kind of energy producing and storage equipment. Outside of that, windows get replaced every 50 years is the assumption. The timber storage is, of course, the biggest part. So the fabric of the building, the podium of the building is the storage. But that is also with the assumption that when this building's taken apart, it's not thrown into a landfill, but being reused. If it is thrown into a landfill or burned, most of that timber storage within the calculator gets thrown back into the atmosphere. So it's not necessarily long-term embodied carbon, but a carbon emission source. So to me, it speaks about you need to design the building as much for deconstruction as for construction when you look at the embodied carbon aspect of it. So lots of stories there. The real story is, yes, we can get near carbon buildings, but once you get to these really low numbers, your energy production can offset whatever you're storing in the building. So we're still way off from the true net zero carbon building, at least in any kind of scale. And just a quick shout out, I'm going to give a further, much longer detailed talk, about an hour and a half, with somebody from the Pastas Institute, Bjorn Kjell from Echo Cocoon, and the developer of the Lego Lock Wood and Nails on October 29th, hosted by the European Cultural Center. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your patience, guys.